Hello everyone, and welcome to today's session on Core Web Vitals. This session has been one of the most requested ones from everyone we talk to in the digital publishing industry, because this is easily one of the most major updates that is coming to Google this year. This is the second session of this year from Quintype on our series of webinars to help publishers create, distribute, and monetize content better. For our session today, we have Sachin Suresh and Indu Priya from HighMinds. HighMinds is a marketing consulting firm offering digital marketing services for startups and growing companies in India and the US. Sachin and Indu have both been working with SEO and with HighMinds for the last 5 years and more. So they have been helping publishers getting ready for Core Web Vitals. And on today's session, they will cover everything that you need to know about the page experience update and answer all your questions about this update. So this webinar will be recorded and will be available to all attendees. So we'll share the recording along with the slide deck, and the recording will be available on YouTube later this week as well. We would like to answer most of the questions that you have. So if you have any questions, drop your questions on the Q&A box. We will pick them up towards the end of the session. Sachin, Indu, thank you for joining us today and taking the time out for this webinar. I will let you get started.
Yeah, thanks, Anand. Thanks for such a lovely introduction. And good afternoon from India for all the joinees. Let's get started. Let me just share my screen. As Anand mentioned, we are here to understand how this update that is going to roll out in May will impact us. And in the last few months, especially, we have seen Google is releasing more and more details towards how publishers or website owners across the site or across the industries should be looking at this update. And what we have gathered in the last week itself is Google is trying to put up a badge even on the SERP, even asking if it is well put or the user experience on the page is good or not. So this symbol is one such that we found out when we were doing the research, and across multiple publishing houses like Search Engine Journal, Search Engine Land, all of them have started getting some feedback from Google on how it is going to impact and other things. And also when Google announced that there is going to be page user update, which is going to involve Core Web Vitals, there was one bigger news that was little buried in it. So we'll get to that in a time. But let's ensure that all of us who will be going through this, are up to date about all the things that Google is expecting us to be in line with, and how this would impact our website performance, and how eventually it is going to impact our businesses as a result of this. So why this update now? Because Google was already using page speed to some extent, so what we have noticed was way back in 2010 is when Google started page speed for desktop rankings. And as you can see, it took close to 8 years for Google to again start rolling out updates related to speed. And in the last 2-3 years, that has significantly heightened. Google has started releasing tools to check your page performance. Google has started releasing Google Search Console reports to understand how your site is performing when it comes to your page experience, not only load time. So this gap of 8 years, as one could imagine, is mainly because of lesser usage of smartphones till 2015. When after 2015, when the smartphones became available and the sales of smartphones exploded, everybody had one smartphone or two smartphones in their hand. and people started consuming information and buying things and services using mobile. So this sort of pushed Google and ensured the website owners are providing the best experience to the people who come to Google and search, because ultimately Google makes money out of people who come to their search engine and try to get information or buy things or avail subscriptions like that. So all these things combined, now Google has gone one step extra, and saying that yes, load time is one of the things. Now, what all do that load time include? And apart from load time, what is that experience that is defined that will help Google to assess your page performance and rate them on the basis and try to rank them if it is exceeding expectations. So this is what all the core web vitals is about. So as I mentioned in slide one, right, the bigger news was actually about AMP being one of the main requirements for the publishers to come on top stories till now. As soon as Google announced that AMP is going to be just a requirement and not a mandatory thing, uh, it opened doors for all the other publishers who were not relying on AMP to smoothen their website and ensuring that they offer best performance to their users. So this AMP was also introduced to combat Facebook instant articles. Way back in 2015, Facebook launched this instant articles in May, and to defend its publishing reference sources, Google sort of came up with this AMP in 2015 October. From then on, it's been like Google is telling to the owners that you need to implement tech, and they have been pushing AMP wherever possible. But by 2019-20, as you can see in the dashboard, Parsley dashboard, Google is now the dominant referrer for all the publishing sites. So uh, now it no longer needs that AMP push or AMP as a shield to make people adhere to Google's guidelines. And also AMP has been a tricky one for website owners and the developer community as well, because there's not too much help that is being offered on AMP, and the layout and the user experience on AMP is not as good as if it was an original site, right? So this was the bigger news that was buried in the announcement that many of us missed initially. So again, to reiterate, now there is no requirement for the publishers to have AMP to come in the top stories, articles, videos section, because that used to occupy huge real estate on the SERP and would garner more clicks. This sort of quashes that, and what we predict is AMP is going to die a slow death, right? Slowly, Google would remove the support that it is currently offering in whatever capacity it is. This is similar to the Google Plus that it launched way back when Facebook was emerging as the social media tech. So now it is clear that Google is going to be one of the prominent referrer for all the publishing sites, and it is now moving towards or we would say giving back complete ownership to the website owners rather than forcing them to adopt to an AMP that is not well structured and not cost effective as well.
So, Sachin, so we are also seeing AMP introducing new features such as visual stories. So, do you think publishers should also look at that uh, to engage with their users going down this year?
Exactly. So I think a few months ago, this became a huge story that AMP is required for the visual stories to appear on Google. This says otherwise, meaning yes, if you are able to implement the MP, the core web vitals will automatically be in line with Google's guidelines. And you also have an option now to not go with the MP, but if you adhere to the core web vitals matrices, you still can come up there.
Okay. And we have a question from Ajay who is asking, what is CRUX data?
Crux is the Chrome UX report that is gathered by Google from the real users. So how people access a website using a 3G connection or 4G connection from different mobiles that are there. So this, they call it as field data to assess how real people are able to access your website. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you,
Yeah,
Sachin.
cool. So yes, now the question of why it is about journeys and not exactly pages. Uh, Imagine you are walking through an unfamiliar city to get an important appointment. You walk through various streets and city centers on your way, but here and there, loose paving stones make you trip. There are slow automatic doors you have to wait for open, and unexpected construction detours lead you astray. All of these events interrupt your progress, increase stress, and distract you from reaching your appointment. Now, people using the web feel the same way, that if they are trying to access a particular page or a site, the distraction could be waiting. How long should I wait before I can access it? Or when eventually it loads, if there is any instability, like elements are jumping around, and when you go and try to click that button, it is escaping your thumb, right? And finally, if you're accessing it on mobile, how responsive it is. Are you able to see the fonts clearly, and are the buttons big enough for you to click and not make jumbling attempts in clicking that, right? So these three things are the biggest concerns the users face while accessing information on the internet. And that too, when they search in Google and come to the website, this would make them go away, right? So, and Google doesn't want to do that. And the reason why we talk about mobile is because this core web vitals is going to update your mobile rankings. Please note, this is going to uh, be applicable for the mobile devices at the current moment. Maybe after a few months or a year, Google would roll it out for desktop. Currently, this is a major one for the mobile users, and it is going to affect how your mobile rankings would show up in Google search.
Right. So, slightly expanding on what Sachin just told. So let's go back and try to understand from user point of view what user experience or what loading interactivity and visual stability means for a user. So let me take an example of, let's say I'm trying to read a news article, and I'm in a particular page and the page is trying to load. Now, what does experience mean for me here? So one, how long am I waiting for the page to load is one key factor. Second one, let's say the page is loaded, or let's say the page is loaded half. Now, can I interact with it? Or do I have to wait for the whole page to load? So how is my experience of interactivity on the page? And number three, like Sachin explained, it's about how are the UI elements on the page. Are they stable? Are they jumping around? Let's say I want to go and click on read more button and want to navigate through different pages on the site, and I want to read different articles, but my read more button is jumping around across across the page. So these three are the main factors that decide how the experience for a user is on the website, and Google has defined particular metrics for all these three to understand and measure how these three factors are for your website. So LCP, which is nothing but largest contentful paint, is a metric used to measure the loading aspect of a page. And first input delay, which is FID, is used to measure the interactivity of the page or the website. And cumulative layout shift, or CLS, is the third important metric used to measure the visual stability of the website. And Google concluded these three as the key factors after analyzing its own data and doing a tons of research. So it has analyzed millions of page impressions to understand how these metrics and the threshold affects the users. And it says that after its analysis, it says that users are 24% less likely to abandon the page loads if the page is at the optimum level. And also, if we look in particular about news or shopping sites, let's look at the news. It is 24% less likely that they abandon for the news sites.
Yeah. So, and as Indu mentioned, Google targets 75% of your pages to be in accordance with these three matrices. So LCP, it says to have it under 2.5 seconds and has a buffer of 1.5 seconds that needs improvement. Then the FID, which is the first input delay, would be under 100 milliseconds and has a buffer of 200 milliseconds for you to improve. Then the CLS is for under 0.1 and needs improvement with a buffer of 0.15. So all these three matrices, let's see what do they actually mean in reality.
Right. Let me add one more point here.
Yeah.
So this is taken from the PageSpeed Insights report. I'm sure all of you must be aware of it. Now, what does good or the green or needs improvement orange or red means is that this is the assessment done after analyzing the 75% of the pages. So if it is good, it means that we don't need to worry about that. And orange is when it's most of it is not in a proper shape. And poor is we are far away from the threshold or the optimal score that we need to achieve.
So taking a small example of how a website would load, right? So this is how you would see the transition happening from a blank page to a fully loaded page. So in this, what does largest contentful paint means is when your page is loaded, 75% of it, right? 75% of the page is loaded and most of the things in the first fold is visible for the end user. So this is what we call largest contentful paint, and this has to be under 2.5 seconds for it to fall under the good aspects of Google guidelines. Similarly, the first input delay, this is irrespective of how quickly your page loads, or it is independent of the largest contentful paint, right? It includes whether you scroll down or you click on to expand a particular paragraph text or anything that you try to interact on the site is known as first input delay. So this should enable the user to start interacting with your website, be it entering the name or just by scrolling. It should respond to that user action. And this should be under 100 milliseconds to fall under the good aspects of Google guidelines. And finally, the cumulative layout shift, right? So as you see, multiple elements on the page are loading, and only when it is finally loaded and where there is no imbalance in elements being floaty or jumping here and there. So that is how the cumulative layout shift is calculated. The stability of the page upon a fully loaded site. Now here, there's a tricky thing to have, because as publishers, we would want to showcase our ads for the monetization benefits, right? And this is again becomes tricky to ensure that we use HTML5 ads and other things which would be having animations and other things. But placement of the ads should be in such a manner that it is not moving around. It should be sort of stabilized and sticky and not move here and there.
Sachin, we have a question about the 75th percentile of all pages. So do you mean to say that at least 75% of all the pages on the domain should be optimized?
Yes, that is what Google is trying to convey. That yes, as Google, we know that it is impossible for all the pages in a site to be on the same level. So at least try to prioritize those pages which you want to ensure it is getting the highest priority in that manner. So in that way, Google is hinting that 75% of the pages. So from the data, what we analyzed is suggesting the same as well.
Interesting. So, so most of our audience today is from the news industry who churn out like tens of content pieces on a daily basis. So it would definitely be a challenge to sort of optimize all of them. Uh, at least keep the 75% of the domain optimized for search.
Yes, that's what. Let's start off with the high priority pages, right? Then slowly we could expand it as and when we start noticing if there is any fluctuations or not, because this is going to roll out in May, and we would have to wait and see for at least a week or two to understand how well it is going to impact us.
Definitely.
So with this, Google has given us tools to ensure that we are well prepared in advance, and we would also need to know how the page is being performed for different set of queries, and when people are accessing it through different set of devices and other things. So we have few tools which are recommended by Google. The Chrome UX report, which enables site owners to quickly assess performance of their site for each web vital as experienced by real world Chrome users. So this was the same crux which we talked about earlier, right? So this will help even Google to understand how your page is being accessed, and for you also to get the report of the actual users who are visiting your website. Then there is open source Web Vitals JavaScript library that can be used with any analytics provider which supports customer metrics, or maybe as a reference for how to accurately capture each of the core Web Vitals for our site's visitors. So these are two things. And of course, Google Search Console is one of the important tools that will help us to keep track of how our pages are performing on a regular basis. Maybe if you are tracking it on a daily basis, or if you are tracking it on a weekly basis, it depends. But Google Search Console will help us understand how it has impacted, and how we can plan our next set of optimizations with respect to the core web vitals. Of course, there is Lighthouse DevTools and PageSpeed Insights, which uses lab data, right? So the lab data is how it performs when we do a test without any real users. It's just how Google Chrome is able to load uh, and other things. So with coming to this, we at QuinType have these things ensured for each build. So Anand, if you could explain that, would be a better addition to this.
Yes, sure. So, like every tech folk working with Google as a source of traffic, we have also been, working at a fast pace to sort of make sure that we are compatible with all metrics of the Core Web Vitals. To that effect, what we have done is uh, we have formed a specific team that will work on the performance of these front-end websites for our publishers. And the way that we ensure that we do not fall on performance is that we have a continuous integration with the Lighthouse services. So that sort of tells us that each time an update to our code is published, it does not impact the Core Web Vitals metrics. Apart from that, the front-end team that works under the Ahead product that we have, we have been rewriting most of our code base to reduce JavaScript bloat, implementing lazy load for content as well as ads, And we have been implementing something that we call as the light rows. So these are design components that are really light to load, and we are seeing a very good impact on search on the metrics that we are tracking.
That's great, Anand. So I would urge the audience to go back to their developers and tell what Anand just mentioned to implement it on their servers, or reach out to Anand and his team so that they could help you figure out how this can help to be smoothened over a period of time. Anand?
So this is the results that we have been seeing so far. So we are seeing a FID of 100, under 100 milliseconds. The cumulative layer shift is less than 0.1 at this point. The largest contentful paint is something that we are still working on. We are at 3.9 seconds at this point.
And the Malibu framework, Anand, if
Yes,
you could just
so the
explain.
Malibu framework is the front end framework that powers all the websites on our network. So all the publishers use the Malibu framework for their front end. So this is the result from the Malibu framework. So we are improving the framework itself so that publishers can see the benefits on their metrics.
That's great, Anand. I think this would help publishers get their overheads come down by a significant margin.
We have a question. So someone is asking, so of these three, which one do you think should be the one that the publisher should be prioritizing? Is it CLS, FID, or LCP? Or is it a combination of all three?
Yeah, so it is always a combination of all three, but it is the CLS that has a more weightage among these three. So Google itself has declared that, Google for each of the metrics along with the other UI metrics, like, speed indexed or time to interactive, etc. They were among all these metrics, Google has given a weightage for each of these, and it is among these three, it is LCP that has the highest weightage of 25%.
Got it.
In the next case study, we'll see on the similar lines. So this is for the NDTV, right? When Google started its optimization with Core Web Vitals. So NDTV had close to 200 million unique users every month, and it was critical for them to optimize for quality of user experience. Because although the engagement rates were well over industry average and highest among their peers, their team still saw room for improvement and decided to invest on the Web Vitals along with other product changes to improve their engagement rate. So as you could see, this was taken a days back, the matrices, and the cumulative layout shift is at 0.105, and the other, the largest contentful paint is at 2.5, right? So similarly, they have moved towards optimizing for the core web vitals that Google is trying to push it nowadays. And let's see how they sort of did it. So one, the largest contentful paint, right? By delaying the third-party requests, which included ad calls for below the fold ad slots and social network embeds, which were also below the fold. So this means that the SEO aspects of having the first fold ready as soon as possible still holds good. And it could also include your ads, but ensure that below the fold takes more time and gives more processing time for the first fold, and that should help in your largest contentful paint. Coming to caching, increasing the caching of static content from a few minutes to 30 days helped, and the cascading style sheets, usage of fonts, font display to display text sooner while the fonts are still being loaded. Then the vector graphics used for icons rather than true type fonts. And as Anand mentioned, lazily loading a JS and CSS files wherever it is possible also helped. And finally, the pre-connect, right, which is prefetching before the actual other establishing of the connection starts. This, however, is supported by most of the notable browsers, and we should start using these tags to quickly load all these things. So with this, they achieved a CLS score of 0.05. So before the beginning of the optimization project, they had benchmarked their LCP score at 3 seconds with the 75th percentile of their users based on the Chrome user experience data. So after the optimization, it came down to 1.6, which is currently at 2.5, right? So this is an ongoing process, as you have seen. And uh, with a framework like QuinType, you are always updated and you don't miss on any of these things. Rather than you seeing a drop in your rankings and then go back, our framework will ensure it is checked for every build on every build. So the impact, right? You would ask me, I mean, yes, there was an improvement in LCP and bounce rate reduced. So all of this in turn helped them to get more subscriptions and thereby increasing their engagement rates on their site as well. So when you go back to your development teams, or when you want to make your senior management get hold of approvals of all the things that we just discussed on Core Web Vitals, you should take back and say that this is also going to impact our business as such. So ensure that you are already prepping up your teammates on how this is going to impact. And you might have questions like, okay, what if I'm not ready yet? What if May 2021 comes and my developers are still working on improving it? Don't panic, right? As with any other previous updates, this might not be as we have imagined. It might not be as disastrous as it could be. The only reason why Google announced it way ahead of time is because even Google knows that it takes humongous effort from the development team to pull this off. And this is where QuinType comes in, right? Because they are already ahead of the curve and they have already started tackling some of these important issues to help reduce the stress on your development teams. So having said that, this would become an important aspect when you are competing for those 1, 2, and 3 positions, right? Because Google still gives highest priority for the intent of the query and the relevant content that is being shown in the search results. So when you are in that 1, 2, and 3 slots, all the other matrices would be on the similar lines. Your title or the content, the richness of it, the snippet aspects of it, right? So all of these would be very similar, and this could be that differentiating factor for you to outrank your competition, right?
Sachin, do you see this impacting the Google Discover as well as the other properties such as Google News also impacted by this update? Or is it going to be just core search initially and then rolled out to the rest?
So for now, what we have understood from even John Muller's Google Hangouts is that it is going to impact the core search and the new search. Discover is still in the gray. We are not sure because we didn't get a proper response from the Google team for the same as well, right? Because this Google Discover is a behavioral element of the search, and that might take some time is what we are assuming at this point of time.
Got it.
Yeah. So we are now open to questions.
We have a question from Manivandan. So he is asking around how developers can handle metrics when there is a intermittent network connectivity issue when the server performance is inconsistent. So how do you think publishers or developers can handle that scenario?
I think Anand, you would be the right person to give that.
Yeah. So from what I understand, I think Google takes an average of all the field data. So even if a few of your users have trouble with the network, this thing, so, as far as the majority of your users have a good experience, I think it should be it should not impact your rankings or metrics in a large way.
Yes.
Yeah, so adding on to that, field data, right, which Anand mentioned, is again calculated based on if you were in a poor connectivity. Obviously, Google would also take that into consideration that it for a page to load in 2 seconds, it would have taken 4 to 5 seconds to load with that poor connectivity. So it takes all that into account and then presents its data. So a combination of lab data and the field data would help the
Analyze.
developer to analyze and optimize the pages on that.
And as a follow-up to that, Sashank wanted to know if uh, a developer should use PageSpeed Insights or the Google Lighthouse, primarily because Lighthouse shows you lab data and the PageSpeed Insights shows the field and lab data.
Yeah, I think both of it, because PageSpeed Insights already includes Lighthouse details to some extent. Uh, so for a developer, the lab data would help him to identify things on his end, and the field data would actually let him know how it is performing, meaning how the optimizations that was done based on the lab data is impacting the real world users. So a balance of both would help the developer to take that decision. For example, we have seen in some of the cases wherein a news site has scored low on the lab data, but the field data shows it to be loading under 3 seconds, wherein lab data, it might be showing as 8, 9 seconds, right? So in this case, we know that the real field data is on a good end, and we just need to slightly tweak or keep optimizing the lab data and not too much fret on why lab data is so low, because as long as the real users are able to access your page without of a much hassle, we shouldn't be worrying too much.
Yeah, so adding to that, what we also noticed is usually we don't see much difference between, page speed and the Lighthouse post. So, but the way to use both of them is, let's say we are on a staging server, then the Chrome user report will help us to understand how it is, how the metrics are based on our internet connection speed, everything, etc., etc. So that will set up an understanding of how we are doing in our network, and when we take it live, page speed is something that gives us an overall understanding of how the lab data is and how the field data is also getting gathered.
So we have a question around AMP. So will Google Page Experience Update consider the metrics on AMP, or will they take the web performance for the metrics?
So if you are
sorry, this is assuming that a publisher has AMP on their website already.
Yes. So if you already have AMP, Google says you are already qualified for the Core Web Vitals and you are in sync with their guidelines. So which means you don't have to worry too much. You are already qualified and you are in good sites with Google.
Yes.
But as I mentioned in the beginning, the AMP support might slowly diminish. So let's be cognizant of that and be prepared if that is going to happen. We are also trying to optimize for the existing pages.
Got it. So if the website is already performant and it comparable to an AMP page, does a publisher really need AMP anymore?
No.
Okay, got it. So we have a question from Ashish. He's asking about how lazy loading ads can improve LCP.
Yeah, so it definitely improves, but at the same time, we just have to check there are other factors also to consider. Let's say, what is the size of the third party scripts, etc., because we have seen this across multiple cases where lazy loading is not the only fix. Even there are other things to consider, like the size of it and when we are fetching it, etc., etc. So lazy loading is one option, but not the entire solution.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think those are all the questions that we had for today. No, wait, we have more questions coming in.
Yeah, sure.
So Neelakantan is asking around the Core Web Vitals report around Chrome user experience. Is there a daily tracking option available in that report?
Yes, so it offers the API option also, Google. I think with that, they would be able to get the data on
Yeah,
a daily
there
basis.
is API option and there are also multiple scripts available. Wherein using this API, we can track them on a daily basis. And also, I just want to emphasize on Google Search Console here. Google Search Console already tells us, which metric is lower. Is it LCP or CLS, etc. So I think Google Search Console also is one good start, one good tool to start with.
True.
Yeah.
So we have another question. So usually we see that websites load pretty well when developers build them for the first time, right? But the moment you add external third-party scripts or even your analytics for that matter, then the scores start taking a hit. So how does one fix that, or is there any tips around those?
Third party scripts are always, the core of the problem. Let's say if you only have analytics script doesn't work in the same way. So, using Google Tag Manager instead of directly hard coding and putting the code on the website helps, number one. Number two, also the lazy loading technique is one. And also, I would suggest we often tend to use a lot of third party scripts that are not helpful for us. So we can just have an audit and remove them. So lazy loading is one option, and also pre-connect and pre-fetch is another option. Caching is one option. So we have multiple options. So yeah, depending on our requirement, we can choose accordingly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it possible to get the Web Vitals data in Google Analytics?
No, not as of
Not at
now.
this time.
It is Google Search Console that gives the Web Vitals data.
Yes.
And Google already has a Google Data Studio setup for the Google Web Vitals score and other things. I think we should check out that as well. You just need to connect that to the site and
yeah, you can probably pull in data from both analytics and Search
Yeah.
Console to build out your own reports that you need to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Makes sense. All right. So those were the questions that we had for the day. Indu, Sachin, thanks for joining us today. And if any of the attendees would like to reach out to High Minds about their performance, do feel free to.
Yes. So I have this. So we have been blessed to have a strong and empathetic leadership. Jyoti, who's our CEO, and Deepthi, who's our Chief Strategy Officer. So feel free to reach out to the below email IDs and on all our social media handles. You could see Hive Minds, right? We would be happy to chat and we'll help if you think we are up for it.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending today's session, and do stay tuned for more webinar invites from our end around creating and monetizing content better.
Yeah. Thanks
Thank you
for
so
all
much.
of you who have joined in despite the timing and the work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.